Look, boss! The plane! The plane! That was Tattoo. Tattoo. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Horror Movie Syllabus. My name is Professor Victor, and I'll be your host as we go through all the essential, noteworthy, interesting, and notorious modern horror films. If you're new to the channel, I recommend you check out our introduction video. There's a link to it in the description below, and it'll give you a pretty good overview of what the Horror Movie Syllabus is all about. Basically, we look at a particular subgenre of horror, and then we pick 3 movies from that subgenre to explore. And today, we're digging into taboo horror movies. This is all part of our Horror Movie Supplement, which is an additional 100 subgenres to the original 100 subgenres that we looked at on the Horror Movie Syllabus. And these subgenres are admittedly a little bit more niche, a little bit more off the beaten path, and the movies, as a result, tend to sometimes be a little bit more off the beaten path, and that is for sure the case today. We're talking about taboo horror movies, and by that I mean movies that are focusing on taboo subject matter. There are lots of movies that have a taboo scene in there, and there's even movies in other subgenres that deal with taboo subjects. There are definitely a lot of crossovers in this subgenre. There's a lot of movies that would qualify here that have been talked about in other subgenres. But what we're looking at here are movies that are for sure envelope pushing, edgy, transgressive. They are taboo. The subject matter is stuff that we are uncomfortable talking about and definitely uncomfortable looking at. And these are the movies that dare to go venture into these taboo areas, these forbidden areas, and present something sometimes for to make a message, to make a statement, to say something important, and sometimes just to shock or titillate. And we're going to kind of look at all of that, frankly, in this video. A lot of the movies that we're going to cover today are notorious or infamous for their taboo subject matter. That is the main reason why they have any kind of notoriety, or why people have ever watched them or talk about them, is because they are taboo, or because the subject matter that they are discussing is taboo. And like I said, it's not like we haven't talked about this kind of stuff before, but I just want to throw this out here. Trigger warning for everything we're talking about today. All the movies, this whole video. Frankly, if you are pretty sensitive to various topics, then maybe this isn't the video for you today. Like, maybe you just come back next week and we're talking about something completely different. But right now, a lot of what we're going to talk about is going to be tough subject matter, stuff that people struggle with, stuff that makes people uncomfortable. And again, I think that's the point. Most of the time in these movies, that's the point. The point is to make people uncomfortable. The point is to tackle these things that we don't normally talk about, that we don't normally look at. And whether or not that has merit is going to depend from movie to movie, and how I feel about it is going to depend from movie to movie. Because I'm going to tell you right now, up front, spoiler alert, I don't love all these movies. I really don't. Some of these movies I really don't care for, and some of them I think are quite good. So we're going to get into all of that, of course, as we dig into the movies. But I just wanted to let everybody know, like, this is going to be some weird stuff, some rough stuff, some gross stuff, some inappropriate stuff. It's going to be a bumpy ride, and we're going to organize them in undergraduate, graduate, postgraduate, like we always do. But in this case, I think we're going to go increasingly more bizarre or envelope pushing, at least in my perspective. Like, I think that's a subjective analysis, but it's my channel, so it's going to be my analysis, my perspective on that. In my perspective, these movies are going to get increasingly more strange, more bizarre, more envelope pushing, more edgy. And so yeah, we're gonna see how it goes, man. It's going to be a weird one. So like I said, buckle up and join me on this ride as we venture into the taboo. The first taboo horror film that we're looking at today, the undergraduate level selection, is I Stand Alone. I Stand Alone came out in 1998 and was written and directed by Gaspar Noé, who we have talked about a couple times on the channel before. We looked at Irreversible. We looked recently at Climax. So we've talked about him before. We know a little bit about what he's about and what he can do and how edgy he can be. And this movie, of course, is no exception. I think this might be his very first movie or his second movie, feature film. And so it's early Noé. And it's focusing on some taboo stuff, namely incest and sexual assault, not to mention racism, homophobia, nationalism, gun use, there's suicide. There's a lot of stuff to look at here, a lot of stuff to go over. We're going to get into all of that a little bit more closely as we dig into it. First, if you haven't seen it before, the movie is about a butcher who has been in prison for a misunderstanding act that he committed, and he's been released, but as a result, he's lost his butcher shop, he's lost his livelihood, his wife is gone, and he's raising a daughter, a teenage daughter on his own, and she's having issues, and so she has to be put away, and he's met a new woman. Basically, life is challenging and difficult for him, and he's struggling, and he's starting to focus that anger and frustration outward towards other people who may wind up becoming victims of him as he plots his actions. And we're going to go ahead and stop there so as to not spoil the movie for you. But the movie is a bit of a hard watch for a number of reasons, not the least of which is the subject matter, but also because it's a little bit of rough filmmaking. Like I said, this is Noé's, I think, first feature film, if not his first, it's like his second. And it's rough. It's not quite the polished, slick Noé that we see in later films, but you do see flashes of what he would become. You start to see some of the static shots that suddenly will zoom in very quickly, or the weird pans and things like that. The stuff, the camera work that Noé would become famous for, that he would use so effectively later on, is evident here. So you see the makings of it. It's low budget. The film stock looks grainy and gritty, which gives the movie a grimy, gritty feel, which makes it feel all the more effective. So I'm assuming it was for budget reasons, but it may have been intentional to give it this uncomfortably realistic feel to it. The movie is uncomfortable, to say the least. And in case you didn't know, it's actually technically a sequel to a short film that Noé did in 1991 called Carne, which I actually did go and watch. It is not great, to be honest with you. And this movie pretty much recaps the events of that movie at the beginning of this one. So you don't necessarily have to see it to follow what's going on here, but that movie probably explores a little bit more. And again, uncomfortable because it's dealing with a lot of things. This guy with a lot of rage and a lot of frustration and really perverse and inappropriate desires, namely his affection for his daughter, that is told in a way that I don't think is supposed to be sympathetic. I don't think you're supposed to like him, and you don't like him. It's not like you ever like him, but you sit with him. The whole movie, you sit with this butcher, and it's uncomfortable and gross to be in his head. Like, it's literally, the vast majority of the dialogue is voiceover of him, his inner monologue. And it's uncomfortable to be sitting with his inner monologue and listen to him plot his revenge against gay people and black people and, you know, people, foreigners from other countries, and hear his thoughts about his daughter. Gross, uncomfortable. And I don't know if Noé's working out some internal demons or whatnot, or if this is, I don't know what he's trying to say. I'm not sure what he's trying to say with this movie. Like, is it like, oh, this guy's a bad guy and this attitude is bad? Sure. Is that maybe a political commentary about France and the economy at the time? Maybe there's strong argument made that there's a political angle to this movie and how the economy is affecting the average Joe, and because there's a whole thing about how he can't get work and stuff like that, and he's lost his business, and Muslims have come in and taken over his old store. And it's interesting stuff. It's just that's not where it focuses on. That's not. It doesn't dive into it and drill into that and dig into it more. It just kind of surface level mentions it. So I don't know if Noé's really trying to be political here, or if he's just trying to be shocking or what. But I feel like he's really intrigued by this butcher character and the breakdown of his mental health and how his mental health is deteriorating, because he made a short film about him, then he made this feature-length film about him, and then that character still pops up in Irreversible at the end or the beginning, depending on how you want to look at it. If you know in Irreversible, you know what I'm talking about. But if you want to see the resolution of this movie, I Stand Alone, it's kind of alluded to or discussed in Irreversible. You find out what happens to the butcher in Irreversible. So that's kind of weird too. It's like he felt compelled to put a bow on this story, which I don't know that it really needed, but it is interesting. But the movie does end on kind of a weird, not ambiguous note, but an unresolved note. And so I guess maybe he felt like people need that resolution. Okay. I feel like he just doesn't want to leave the butcher alone. Like, he likes this character. And I don't mean likes like he likes who he is. I think he's just fascinated with him. He keeps wanting to work with him and explore him. And okay, but it's uncomfortable. Like, he's not a likable character. And you feel dirty being in his mind. Like, some of the scenes are obviously uncomfortable, especially some of the molestation type stuff. It doesn't go too far, but it goes far enough that it's troublesome. And then there's some violence on the screen that is pretty realistic and disturbing as well. And it's uncomfortable but the real reason it's uncomfortable is not just because that's on the screen, because it's relatively brief in relation to the runtime of the movie, but it's also how you're in his head and everything's from his perspective and how he's justifying everything. It's uncomfortable. It's gross. And just to be clear, there is a part in the movie where Noe drops a warning, drops a title card. It says, "Warning: You've basically got 30 seconds to stop watching this movie before you're gonna be totally disturbed." Honestly, he ain't wrong. That's where like the real dark stuff comes. Most everything up until that point is relatively tame-ish. It's a lot of vitriol and stuff like that, but it's mostly audible, and you're not seeing a ton of stuff on the screen. But when you set 30-second warning, everything after that's going to be real uncomfortable, real transgressive. Most of us aren't going to be comfortable watching it very much, and even the true total gorehounds, like seasoned horror vets, probably ain't going to love it. It's not exactly a fun ride of a movie, but it is a really well-made movie in the sense of seeing early Noe, like seeing his potential talent, like seeing him starting to try to rein in how he uses a camera, how he tells a story, how he explores taboo subject matter and puts it on the screen, and what to hold back and what to not hold back. It's really interesting. I'd say his later movies get a lot more uncomfortable. Like Irreversible is arguably more uncomfortable than this one, but being in this guy's head is way more uncomfortable than anything in Irreversible. So I think that was an interesting way to do it, and it makes for a really interesting story. Again, I can't really say it's a fun ride, but I think it's a very challenging and interesting movie. And from an artistic perspective, I can really appreciate what Noe's trying to do here in putting us in the mindset of this guy. I just don't like it. I don't like being there, but I think it's a good movie. This is a movie that I don't think in fact, I know I have not revisited it very much. I've seen it twice now. I saw it the first time, and I saw it for this video, and I don't feel compelled to go back and watch it a lot again. But I respect the hell out of it. I think it's a really powerful movie in making you be in this mindset, and you're not going to want to be in there, and it's not for everybody. Again, like I said, trigger warning for everything, and these movies aren't necessarily for everybody. So you've got an idea of what I'm talking about in this movie. You understand what it's about, and whether or not you want to check it out. If you've seen it, let me know what you think. Like, do you agree with me? Do you think that Noe's kind of dwelling on this butcher and kind of more fascinated with him than maybe he should be? And does that make you like weirded out by Noe? Maybe. I don't know. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this, because this is one that I haven't really talked about with anybody before, but I'm fascinated by this movie. I don't love it in terms of like it's not a fun experience, but I do love it in terms of a filmmaking experience. I think it's a really powerful movie, and Noe did a really good job as an early filmmaker trying to convey a certain emotion. I think he nailed it. So let me know what you think in the comments below. The next taboo horror movie that we're looking at today, the graduate level selection, is Imprint. Imprint came out in 2006 and was directed by Japanese director Takashi Miike, who we have talked about on the channel before. Notably, we looked at Audition, we looked at Ichi the Killer. I think we watched one or two other ones, but those ones give you a pretty good flavor of what Miike is notorious for. He's notorious for very strange imagery and very extreme gore and violence in a very almost surreal fashion. That's what he's known for, and he delivers in this movie quite a bit. In movie, well, we're going to get into all that. Calling it a movie in and of itself may be a bit of a misnomer, but we're going to dig into all that in just a minute. First, if you haven't seen it before, the movie is about an American who goes to an island that is in Japan that is full of prostitutes, and he's looking for a specific woman that he was in love with that he had to leave behind and said he would return for. And he's not able to find her, but he comes across a disfigured prostitute who he spends the evening with because he's stuck on the island. And she starts regaling him with stories because she allegedly knew his love and is trying to let him know what has happened to her. Only she doesn't seem to be the most trustworthy person in the world, and her stories get more and more dark and more problematic, and we're going to stop there so as to not spoil it for you. But this movie is classic Miike. It really is delivering what Miike does. And you got to ask yourself if the people who engaged him to do this knew what they were getting themselves into, because Imprint isn't really exactly a full-length feature horror movie. It's about an hour and change, hour and 3 minutes or so. And it's because it was an episode of the Showtime series Masters of Horror, which was a series put together by Mick Garris that got a bunch of classic horror directors together, like Don Coscarelli and John Carpenter and Garris himself, and a bunch of other known names, Lucky McKee, that were going to do episodes, 1 hour episodes about a various horror movie, like the little horror mini movies, if you will, and each one would be an episode of this series, Masters of Horror, and they got Mike to do one. It was going to be the 13th episode of the first season, and when they saw it, they, being Showtime, the network, decided we're not showing this. We're not showing this, and the reason why is because of the taboo themes that they're talking about there, namely. There is torture, there is molestation, there's incest, and there is abortion. And I think the abortion was where the line was drawn. It's always been a touchy subject, but even almost 20 years ago, the way that Mike handled it, yeah. I feel like, again, did they know what they were getting themselves into when they hired Mike to do this? I'm not sure. Mike, for his part, felt like he wanted to push the envelope. He wanted to try to really get up to the line, but not cross the line of what could be shown on American TV. So he kept checking in and saying, "Am I still within the bounds? Am I still within bounds?" And he felt like he was really towing that line, but he was wrong. And like when you see this, it's very obvious that you're not going to put this on TV, even on cable TV, even on pay cable TV. You're not putting this on TV because Mike went there. He went there and showed some really crazy stuff. At some point, it goes from even being just like traditionally what you'd expect from Mike with the violence and the torture and stuff like that, and just to get into some really taboo and forbidden, horrific-looking, gruesome stuff. It's funny. Mike really was trying to tell this classic traditional Japanese tale called Boki Kyoto. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that right because my Japanese is a little rusty, but but it's done by Shimiko Iwai, and it's supposed to be a traditional tale, and you can see where that might be, but you can tell that Mike did his Mike thing to it and put his spin to it, because it starts out pretty tame. You've got these prostitutes that are all on this island, and it's just kind of weirdly creepy, and they have the traditional Japanese kind of geisha looking thing going on, and it's very stylistic and cool. And then you've got the one prostitute and she's disfigured, so there's some creepy makeup on it to make her face look kind of creepy and everything like that. And then she starts telling stories, and the stories kind of go in towards some macabre stuff and some torture and things like that. You get like needles in the mouth and in the fingernails and stuff like that. You get some burning and stuff like that. But it's nothing any worse than like, say, Audition, right? It's really stuff you've seen before. It's not too much. It's pretty intense, but it's not too much. It's Mike, it's what they maybe would have expected, but I don't think they expected him when they start getting into the storytelling and talking about how this woman's mother was, not a midwife, but actually a woman who would perform abortions, and how she would dispose of the fetuses in the river. And he shows it. And that's, I think, where the line got crossed. Because I was shocked when I saw it. My jaw hit the floor. I was like, wow, he's actually showing this. And, I don't know what Mike was thinking, but definitely American television was not prepared for Takashi Miike doing that. So it's easy to see why this one wasn't going to be released on TV, why they were going to ban it. And it's not very often that a pay TV or pay cable channel will ban something like that, but this one they did. And it got released on home video, it got released on the DVDs and Blu-ray box sets, so you can find it. It's not that hard to find, but it's an interesting watch. Like, again, if you like Mike, I think this is definitely something that you can get behind, because it's, again, for the large part, classic Mike. And then he goes a little bit farther than I've seen him go in some of his other movies. This whole abortion stuff and the fetuses, it's pushing it. It is. So, maybe you knock down for that, and that's totally fine. Don't watch it if you don't want to watch it. But it is good. Like I said, it's an hour long, and it's a good storytelling experience. The performances are not fantastic, if I'm being honest with you. Like, the main woman is pretty good, but like a lot of the other prostitutes aren't great. The male lead's not great. It's not horrible. It's not. You're not there for the acting. You're there for the storytelling and the visuals. The visuals are top notch. They're top notch Mike, and the story is suitably creepy. And I don't want to spoil things too much, but it goes some really bizarre places. Mike can get super weird, and it goes super weird at the end in a great and hilarious way. So I actually really enjoy Imprint. I think it's a lot of fun, and it's got this taboo stuff in it. It doesn't really make me too uncomfortable. It really didn't hit me in any sensitive spots, but I understood. Like, I was still shocked. I was still shocked by it. I was still surprised by it. And I think Mike was trying to do that. He was trying to push the envelope and make things edgy, and he succeeded. So Watch it at your own risk, I suppose, but I do think it's quite good. I enjoy it quite a bit, so I would recommend Imprint if you've got the constitution for it. And the last Taboo horror movie that we're looking at today, the postgraduate level selection, is La Bête. La Bête came out in 1975, and I'm not 100% sure I'm pronouncing that right because my French is a little rusty, but it is The Beast. It translates to The Beast, and it is a French film directed by Valerian Borochik. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that either, but I actually am a little bit familiar with his work. He's kind of known for erotic movies that are really surreal and strange. He did Immoral Tales, which I've seen. It's why I'm familiar with him, and we'll get into that a little bit more. But he is known for doing strange eroticism, and that is 100% what we're looking at when we look at this movie. Now, if you haven't seen it before, the movie has been described as a pornographic version of Beauty and the Beast, and while that's not really accurate because the stories really don't align at all, the comparison makes some sense. The movie is about a marriage that's being arranged between a wealthy woman and a man who has a lot of learning disabilities or strange problems, and it's not going well, but it's necessary in order to have this money get transferred over. It's all being motivated by greed, but the man is hiding a secret, and his father is trying to push this wedding along before this secret comes out. And meanwhile, the woman is having dreams / fantasies of a strange beast in the forest and having strange sexual relations with it. And we're going to go ahead and stop there because I don't want to spoil it for you, even though it'd be hard to spoil this movie because it's just so darn weird. The movie is actually based on a novella called Locusts, which I have never read before. I know nothing about, but it was supposed to be one of the short stories in Immoral Tales. And actually, footage was filmed for that. And a lot of the footage was filmed for Immoral Tales was actually used in this movie in the dream sequences. And the movie is controversial and well known and notorious because it's dealing with bestiality or zoophilia. I had to look this up. The distinction between the two is kind of nebulous. Zoophilia seems to be an attraction to, like a romantic attraction to animals, whereas bestiality is actually like the sex act with animals. And in this case, I think a little bit of both is happening in this movie. And it's funny because I first became aware of this movie in college. This movie came out in 1975, but it has like this underground reputation for being really wild horror movie. More on the horror movie part in a minute. But I remember finding out about this in college and being obsessed with trying to find it and see it. And, this is back, to date myself a little bit, this is back before the internet made everything so easy to find. So it was a little difficult for me to finally track this movie down and watch it. And when I did, I was unprepared. I had no idea what I was in for. I thought I was going to get something different than what I got. Because what I got is really more like comedic sex farce with really weird monster porn in it and not really much horror. There's very minimal horror in this movie. It's barely a horror movie, to be honest with you. But what it does do is it focuses on something called teratrophilia, which I didn't know what that was. But that is basically sexual attraction to monsters, right? And so this movie is often highlighted as kind of a precursor or a trailblazer for movies like Untamed or Possession, movies that have like this monster sex kind of angle to monster porn, if you will. This movie kind of did it first. And it's really explicit. This movie is very explicit. Like, it starts out with like, actual footage of two horses having sex. So there's that for you. And very weird and awkward and uncomfortable. And there's a lot of talk about like fascination with like animals and animal sex and stuff like that. But really where it goes is not bestiality, but into this teratrophilia, where this woman is having these dreams about being, attacked by this monster that looks kind of like a cross between a bear and a wolf, and then like being sexually attracted to it, and then it's chasing around with this giant erection, and then she winds up having very explicit sex with it. Very explicit sex. It's basically pornographic, and it's gross. I'm not gonna lie, it's gross, but it's also hysterical. It's like it's really hard to take this seriously. It's kind of like watching the worst porn you've ever seen. Really, it's just so ridiculous, and I believe it's meant to be. The tone of this movie is rather comedic. I do think that everybody's playing it big. Everybody's being really like over the top. And it is funny. Like I find this movie to be very funny. Like I said, I don't really find this to be scary at all. I think it barely qualifies as horror. But it's weird because you're kind of laughing at it, but you also feel weird for watching it because it's trying to also be titillating. Like I said, the director Valerian Borchek is not. He's known for eroticism. He's not known for horror stuff. He's known for like being really surreal, check, and being very erotic, check. There's a lot of nudity in this movie. There's a lot of sexual activity in this movie, and it's not all pornographic. A lot of it's simulated like that, but there is a lot of very explicit stuff shown in this movie, and I was unprepared for it. And I feel like even me telling you, you'll still be unprepared for it. But it's not, like I said, it's gross, but it's not. I don't find this movie to be disturbing. I find it to be weird and fascinating and hilarious, and I kind of love it. And it's a little weird to admit that I kind of love it because it is so perverse, but it's gleefully perverse. It's not trying to push an envelope. Well, it is. It's pushing an envelope, I guess, but it's not trying to push something that I think is super offensive. It's something that kind of doesn't really exist. This whole monster angle of it just really makes it kind of like a fantasy thing that is just flat out kind of goofy. It's kind of goofy. Unlike Immoral Tales, which is straight up eroticism, this movie is trying to do something different. And I think it's succeeding. It is throwing in some other stuff in there that's really weird. Like it's got hints of incest in there and like molestation. There's like this priest who has these two young boys with him and he's kind of kissing on them and stuff like that. And so you've got this weird vibe that maybe something inappropriate or untoward is going there. But it's not dwelling on that. It's not really doing much more than like maybe making a commentary on the church, because I do think there's a lot of to be said in this movie about the corruptibility of the church and how they're being bought off. And there's this whole angle about the cardinal coming to bless the marriage and they can't get him there, and they got this priest working for him, but they're promising to buy him a new bell for the church, and he's got these kids with him, and it's very negative portrayal of the church. And I think all of this is maybe a bit of a message, but at the end of the day I think it's trying to shock you and weird you out, and it mission accomplished. I think this movie is super strange, and you kind of have to see it to believe it, but it is definitely not for everybody because it's super weird and really, again, gross. It's monster porn. There's no other way to say this. Like, you're going to see explicit sex between a woman and a, hairy beast. And again, Beauty and the Beast porn, yeah, maybe. It sure as hell looks a lot less romantic there. I will not be your guest for that one, frankly. But I do enjoy this movie. It's too dumb and ridiculous for me to be offended by. I could see people being offended by it, but me, I just found it to be funny. Not a movie I revisit a lot. Again, this is another one that I hadn't seen in years. I hadn't seen this movie since I finally tracked it down, back in the college days. And so I revisited it for this because I remember it being very taboo, and rewatching, I was like, oh, that's right. It's not offensive to me. It's just silly and ridiculous and over the top and gross. So that's my analysis on that. Enter again at your own risk and let me know if you've seen it. This is one that I feel like it's got this underground reputation, but I don't feel like a lot of people have actually seen it. So let me know if you've seen it and let me know what you think of it if you do, because this one, yeah, it's got an audience apparently, but it's a weird one. So let me know what you think. So that's going to do it for our exploration into taboo horror films. But of course, I've got a few extra credit movies to talk about. And these are ones that I'm not necessarily always all recommending, but they're ones that I felt like we should at least mention and talk about a little bit. So here we go. The first movie that we're going to look at is The Strange Thing About the Johnsons. The Strange Thing About the Johnsons came out in 2011 and is actually a short film, not a full-length feature. So I'm kind of bending the rules a little bit here because I usually keep it to features. But between Imprint and this one, I've really bent the rules a little bit. But these are movies that I felt like I needed to talk about, and frankly, I make the rules because this is my channel, so I'm bending them if I want to. But this movie is directed by Ari Aster of Hereditary and Midsommar fame, and that's part of what makes it noteworthy. But the other part of it is its exploration into the taboo of incest. But we're going to get into all that in just a second. First, if you haven't seen it before, the movie is, like I said, a 30-minute short that is exploring this suburban family that is hiding a dark secret. And the dark secret is, of course, that there is incest going on in this household. Incest that is being carried on for years, but there is a bit of a twist to it. It is not exactly what you think of when I tell you that there's a family that has incest going on in there. It is something very different. The sexual abuse that's going on here is not what you're expecting it to be. It's a different, fresh angle. It's a twist angle to it that gives this movie its notoriety and makes it particularly noteworthy and strange. But I'm going to stop there so as to not spoil it for anybody. The movie is a quick watch. And it's not necessarily the most uncomfortable watch because fortunately, the vast majority of the really dark, awful things happens mostly off screen, but there's enough allusion to it that it's still going to be an uncomfortable watch. I want to put it out there for people. Trigger warning, once again, always, that there is some uncomfortable sexual assault stuff going on in this movie. But again, and I'm trying not to spoil it too much, but it's not the way you think. And it's Ari Aster, again, it's a film thesis project that he did for AFI when he was at AFI. He did this as his thesis film. And so it's early Ari Aster. So it doesn't quite have the same panache or style or confidence that Ari Aster would have in his feature film debuts. But it really does still show the kernels of talent. You start to see like the camera work and with the storytelling and with the taboo subject matter and with the family dynamics. You're seeing what Ari Aster is going to become when you get to Hereditary. You're seeing the beginnings of that. And it's very interesting. From a filmmaking perspective, if you're an Ari Aster fan, which I am, this is an interesting watch to see his beginnings, to see him finding that voice and finding that confidence and being able to tell that story in the way that he's going to want to tell. And especially the family dynamics, especially looking at how this dysfunctional family works and what it's about. And it's interesting because reading up on it, doing the research on it, I found out that Ari Aster's motivation for this movie was literally to try to figure out what the worst taboo he could come up with was and make a movie about that. So this movie isn't really trying to say something important. It may actually stumble across an important message about, silence and about, not knowing what goes on behind closed doors and what constitutes a victim and things like that. There's some interesting, serious things that you can extrapolate from this story, but that wasn't the intent. The intent was to shock and to offend. He was trying to find the worst taboo, and this is what he thought the worst taboo was. Not necessarily wrong, frankly, and mission accomplished. Yeah, sure, why not? But it does weirdly kind of undercut to me the story a little bit because knowing that it's just meant to shock makes it feel less important. Even though, like I said, I do think you can make a case for some really interesting, important things. Like I know that some of the reviews have talked about this movie and really focus on the fact it's a black family that we're talking about and what the racial dynamic means and the politics of it and how people view it and the way people talk about or don't talk about these kind of things, especially among the black community. It's interesting stuff that you can take from this, but I don't think it was the intent. And based on what I've read, Ari Aster is just trying to make something shocking. But if he accidentally wound up putting some really important stuff in there, or maybe it was an accident, maybe in writing he really wanted to tell something, but he did something, whether accidentally or on purpose, he did something really fascinating. And the story itself is weirdly, it feels ludicrous, but in the back of your head that it's not. And some of the scenes really, really work. There's a scene where the mother is watching TV and turning the volume up that is harrowing. It really hit for me. That scene was as good as anything that I've seen in his other movies. And so that again, flashes of Ari Aster's brilliance in this movie. I think the ending of the short is a little contrived. It's a little bit weak. It's a little bit neat or pat. It's like, we had to finish this movie up. We don't have much time, so let's wrap it up. And it's not as complex as it could have been. Doesn't dig as deep as I would have liked it to dig. But overall, this movie is a fascinating watch. I don't think it's brilliant. I don't think it's amazing. I don't think it's a must-see. But I do think if you like Ari Aster, you should definitely check it out. But if you're just curious about it, again, maybe do a little research so you know exactly what's going to be happening in this movie. But it's an interesting movie. It's interesting. And if you do check it out, let me know if you think there's some themes worth talking about. Because I do think that there are there. I just don't know that they were actually intentional. I think they might have been accidental. But let me know your thoughts on The Strange Thing About the Dobsons, because this is one that seems like it's got a bit of a following because of Ari Aster. And so maybe you've seen it. And if you have, let's talk about it. The next extra credit movie I'm going to talk about is Traces of Death. Traces of Death came out in 1993, and maybe it sounds like Faces of Death because it's kind of basically the same thing. It's trying to rip off Faces of Death, and it's really kind of notorious not as notorious and well known as Faces of Death, but harder to find than Faces of Death. And that gives it a little bit more notoriety, a little bit more of an allure or mystique than Faces of Death. And I definitely had that when I was trying to track it down again before the internet made it easier to find things. And it's questionable whether or not the effort to find it is really worth it, but we're going to get into that in just a second. First, if you haven't seen it before, like I said, the movie is basically like Faces of Death, which, if you're not familiar with it, is a movie that's a pseudo documentary that is showing a bunch of different, kills and murders and deaths on screen, except that Traces of Death is using actual footage by and large, whereas Faces of Death was faking most of their footage. So this is taking the Faces of Death idea and making it more real, using real footage, usually stock footage and stuff like that. And I'll stop there so it's not spoiled, but there's nothing to spoil really. It's just literally clips of a bunch of different deaths with a cheesy narration going over it that's trying to be spooky, and it's pretty bad. It's laughable. The narration is laughable. It's got music to it that's pretty, in my opinion, bad. I don't really love it. And it's using stock footage, oftentimes really grainy, crappy looking stock footage that is hard to watch. And you can probably tell from my tone, I don't love this movie. Like, as a kid, I was really fascinated with Faces of Death because of just how gory it was and how taboo it was, and to be able to watch that as a kid, as like a 12-year-old or whatever, was very exciting. And being able to watch this gross stuff, and as an adult, and I can watch whatever the hell I want, it loses its appeal. And you heard me talk about Faces of Death on the channel. I ain't impressed anymore. I find it pretty repulsive, especially the animal stuff. And Traces of Death, I feel, is the same way. I feel like I'm a little too old for it. I grew out of it. It's boring, frankly. Watching a bunch of the same kind of footage over and over, largely accident footage, like post-accident footage or autopsy videos, surgery videos. It's dull. It's a slog to get through. And like Faces of Death, it's got a little bit of animal stuff in there. I don't love that at all. But it's much less in Traces of Death than it is in Faces of Death. But it's still there. Just forewarned. And it does have a couple of videos in there that are admittedly kind of fascinating. It's got the Bud Dwyer suicide video, familiar with that? And the woman, I can't remember her name now, the reporter, Martinez, or I can't remember her name now, but it's got her murder in there. So it's got a couple of actual shocking videos that you can just find on YouTube, frankly. They're not that hard to find. So you don't need to sit through, 80 minutes of this movie to watch it, because the movie, again, it's boring. It's really a drag. Look, I don't begrudge people who enjoy it. There are gore hounds that really surpass my appetite for gore and really love this stuff, especially the realistic aspect of it. It gives it a different feel, a different thrill, and I admit that. Seeing an actual corpse versus a Tom Savini corpse has a different hit. It does hit a little bit differently, but I don't know, like, especially watching so much of it in a row and so much of it in very grainy, low quality video, I got bored. It was a slog, man. I really couldn't bring myself to watch any of the sequels. There's a couple sequels that, from what I understand, is just more of the same with more heavy metal music on it. And all right, again, if this is for you, cool. I'm not judging anybody on it. It's just not for me. And it's not even because it's super gross or taboo or offensive even, although again, I don't like the animal stuff. I'm not really offended by it or put off by that. Even like the really touchy things like the Bud Dwyer video. It's just dull. There's too much of it all at once that's the same. There's not enough variety to it, and there's no real point. There's not really a redeeming quality to this video. It's kind of acting like it's being a documentary, and it's really there to titillate, which is fine. That's fine. But there's no message being sent. There's no meat on the bone. It's just a bunch of crappy, death scenes and stock footage that, again, you can probably find elsewhere and target your searches to get a little bit more of what you're looking for. So Traces of Death, I'm not recommending it to anybody, but I'm not because I'm mad at it. It's just because it gets a big old shrug for me. I'm just like, what's the point, And so if you've seen it and you love it, let me know in the comments below, like, if I'm wrong, like why you think it's great or what you enjoy about it. Again, no shade being thrown at you here. Just not for me. So probably not for you guys either. In the last extra credit movie we're going to talk about today is Vases de Noches. And Vases de Noches came out in 1974, and I have no idea if I'm pronouncing that correctly, and frankly, I do not care. The movie is better known in English as The Wedding Trough, and probably more colloquially known as The Pig Fucking movie. So we're going to talk about this one. And it is, if you haven't seen it before, a avant-garde art film about a farmer who has a bunch of animals and lives on his own, and he's clearly got something wrong for him, and he has a very large sow that he is very connected to and enamored of, and a little too enamored of, and in his mind thinks he has some sort of romantic type relationship that he decides to try to consummate as he tries to, or does, have sex with the pig, and then deals with the consequences, the unexpected consequences of that union in ways that are shocking and gross and awful. And I'm just going to stop there so not to spoil the movie too much, but honestly, there's not much to spoil because there's not much to this movie. Like, this movie is an old movie that for some reason has recently gotten a lot of notoriety. Like, somebody somewhere discovered this recently, and I've been seeing more YouTube videos and stuff pop up on it in the last couple of years, and I don't know why. And I think it's because it wound up on one of those iceberg lists as a very low, deep cut on the iceberg list of like most extreme movies. And sure, yeah, definitely. And the problem with this movie is twofold. First of all, I don't love, I love animals, and I don't love animal abuse, especially real animal abuse. And by all accounts, this movie has at least some, if not all, simulated animal abuse and animal cruelty, animal violence on there. And it's not my bag at all. And you heard me talk about Cannibal Holocaust, and this movie is doing the same kind of thing. It's killing animals and abusing animals needlessly, but at least Cannibal Holocaust had a movie, a story like to tell, an interesting story kind of, that the animal abuse wasn't necessary for, but at least it was, if you took it all out, which there's a cut that does that, you still have a movie. If you take the animal abuse out of this movie, there's nothing else there really. And even the animal abuse that's here is not, how do I put this? If you don't have a problem with it or even find it enjoyable, I still think you're not going to like this movie, because this movie's damn boring. It's a slog. It's only like an hour and 15 minutes long or so, hour and 18 minutes, and it's boring as hell. You're going to watch this guy going about his day, messing with animals, and then like defecating. You see him defecate multiple times in this movie, just watching him, listening to it. And I guess technically it's foreshadowing for later, because we're going to not only have bestiality and zoophilia in this movie, but also coprophagia. So, and if you don't know, it's, after you defecate and you got some feces and then you get hungry, right? So this movie clearly is trying to be transgressive and shocking. And it is, it's like I think it's a student film, but this director, and I can't remember his name right now. If I can remember, I'll put it on the screen. But he wound up being a professor at the school, teaching film and stuff like that. And this movie is garbage. Not only garbage because of the subject matter. This is the only time in the video that I'm telling you that the subject matter actually offended me and annoyed me. But also because it's just not good filmmaking. The film looks like crap. It's lit poorly. The footage is crappy. It looks grainy and poorly filmed. The camera angles are unimaginative at best. The performance of the guy is not good. I guess he commits to the role. There's that. But it's really not a well-made movie. There's no artistry to it. There's no filmmaking appreciation here. There's nothing to marvel at. The story is non-existent for the most part, and there's no dialogue in it. The music's not great, and the performance is nothing. There's nothing good about this movie. Like, from taking a step back from the animal cruelty and the stuff I don't like, and just trying to look at it objectively, there's just really nothing good about this movie. I was bored. Like, an hour and change, and I'm just sitting there waiting for it to end. And not just because I find it offensive, because frankly, the offensive animal cruelty stuff is a minor part of the movie. And I shouldn't say that because it's the subject matter of the movie, but you don't see that much of it. I mean, you see this guy chasing this pig around naked, trying to have sex with him, and there is some of it shown, but it's not like you don't see close-ups or anything like that. It's not that pornographic or anything like that, but you do see enough simulation to figure that's what's going on. And I've heard the rumors that it's not simulated, but I couldn't confirm that, and I don't think it actually is. Like, watching it, I don't think it's actually unsimulated. I don't think it's real. I think that part's simulated, but the animals are killed. There's a chicken gets killed. There are some really cute piglets in this movie that are, frankly, the best part of the movie. Some of the scenes with the piglets are very, very cute. That, if there's a redeeming quality of this movie, that there's a couple of scenes, some with ducks and some with the piglets, that are very, very cute. The animals are cute in this movie. But they're, that's actually a detriment because it's never going to end well for them. You know what I mean? It's going to go poorly. And, the piglets do get killed in this movie. And I'm pretty sure those are real because I just don't believe this movie had the budget to fake that. Seeing that is very realistic and it's unsettling. And, having like the chicken killed, which I'm pretty sure is also real. And having like ducks and chickens being dragged around by strings, which is definitely real. Like, screw this movie, man. Like, this is just a terrible movie from a terrible person doing terrible things. And I know in the 70s they didn't care about this stuff as much, but you had to know. Like, they're too cute to not feel something for them. If you don't, then you're kind of like devoid of that humanity. So, screw this movie on that level. But even if you're not like me and you're not bothered by that stuff, if you don't care about it, like, even if you're just, to like this guy and you're kind of into it or whatever, then you're still in for a bad time because it's just not a very good movie. If you're coming for the titillation and the taboo and the grossness and the shock of it all, I think you're going to be disappointed. I think even if you're into this stuff, I think you're going to be bored. I think you're going to feel let down because this movie's reputation, as this taboo movie, I think it's overblown. People put it at the bottom of the iceberg and stuff like that. Talk about, oh, how transgressive and how gross it is and this and that. True, but I think if you go with those kind of expectations, you're going to be like, what the hell? You're going to feel like you kind of wasted your time because you did. I'm going to tell you right now, if you want a Belgian film about bestiality that is a lot more transgressive and a lot more scary and a lot better, Calvaire, which we talked about on the channel before, Calvaire, The Ordeal, that movie has some really taboo stuff in there. That movie's delivering what you think this movie's going to deliver. And it's got a story to it and has some actual filmmaking talent behind it. That movie, I think, is actually quite good. Very rough, very taboo, very edgy. Definitely not for everybody. But if you're coming looking for the goods, if you're looking to be titillated or freaked out or grossed out or have your endurance challenged and have a positive experience with that, Calvaire is what you're looking for, not this movie. This movie's going to let you down. Like I said, if you're at all sensitive to animals or anything like that, you already hate this movie. Don't even watch it. But if that's not a problem for you and you're still thinking, I want to check this one out because people talk about it and how crazy and over the top it is, but you're going to be bored. Like if you watch this movie and you find it captivating or fascinating or interesting, leave me a comment below and explain that to me because I just don't think that's going to be the case. I don't think you're going to. I think there are far more transgressive, better movies that are better made, that are more interesting, that you're going to find are a better use of your time than this one. And so my warning to some people, don't watch it because it's going to piss you off. It pisses me off. And for some other people, I don't think it'll piss you off, but I think it'll be a waste of your time and you'll be bored and that'll annoy you. So it's not for anybody. Don't watch this movie. That's my diatribe on that one. So it's rare that we talk about a movie that I dislike this much. I remember not liking Cannibal Holocaust. That's probably the closest comparison, but even Cannibal Holocaust has more merit than this movie, which is saying a lot. So that's my thought on taboo horror films. Like I said, this is going to be a bit of a bumpy ride, and I think I proved that. But these movies, they run the gamut. Like I said, some of these are trash. Wedding Trough, trash. But some of these are great. Like La Bête, I'm an advocate for that one at my own detriment, I suppose. But these movies are not for everybody. Check them out if you are so inclined. But by all means, if you do, let me know what you think because I'm curious to hear other opinions on this one because this is just me. This is my opinions, and I know that these are very divisive and challenging films. So I'm curious to see what y'all think. And now I think it's time to check out a horror trivia pursuit card. So as you guys know, I like to read a question here live on camera and answer it live on camera and see if I embarrass myself. And we're going to go with the gore category because some of these movies are quite gory and it makes some sense. So here's our question for this time. What is the name of the sinister club which kidnaps victims in the Hostel series from 2005 to 2011? I honestly don't know. I can't remember. I've seen Hostel many times. I've seen the sequel a few times, the first sequel. The second sequel I've seen once. I didn't really care for the third one. But the first one, I loved that movie. I thought it was fantastic. I actually don't hate Eli Roth. Like I know there's a lot of people hate Eli Roth. I'm not one of them. I actually enjoy his movies quite a bit for the most part. I understand that they're a little juvenile or whatever. But for the most part, he's reveling in gore. I like gore. I'm down for that. It can be a little transgressive. Sometimes it can be a little appropriate. I understand that. but I really enjoyed Hostel. It was not what I was expecting. It really knocked my socks off. I think over the years, I probably, like, my enthusiasm has probably waned a little bit, but I remember the first time I saw it, I was really into it. And the sequel didn't quite go in the same direction I did, but I liked what they did in some of the role reversals and stuff like that. I really liked Laura German in that movie, and I thought it was still really good. So I've seen it a couple times, not as many times, but I've still seen it enough times that I think I remember these pretty well. And I remember that this club is in both of them, and I don't remember what it's called. I remember that it's like this elite club that has like all these rich people in it, right? That's the whole point, is the rich people pay money to kill unfortunate poor people. And it's, interesting commentary, frankly, but I don't remember what it's called, but I remember you get a tattoo, and I think the tattoo is like a dog on it, if I recall correctly. It's been a little bit since I've seen it, but I'm almost positive it's like a dog on the tattoo. So like that's kind of where I'm going. So lock in your answers. I'm kind of proud on a little bit now. So lock in your answers, and I'm going to go ahead and guess. Because of the tattoo, I'm going to guess that it's called Big Dog. That's the club's name, is Big Dog. And it's just a pure guess based on that. And I really honestly don't remember at all. And I'm kind of embarrassed. I feel like I should remember, but I'm going with Big Dog. I think I'm wrong, but that's all I've got. I'm final answer. I'm going to stick with that because sometimes I talk myself out of it. Let's see what the card says. Elite Hunting Club. The second I read that, I feel like I did know it because I've seen the movie multiple times, but I feel like I should have been able to get that, and I didn't. But I was nowhere close. I mean, Big Dog, I was nowhere close on this one, so I got it wrong. It's a little embarrassing because, again, I do really like Hostel. So did you get it right? Did you guys guess this one right? And if not, what were your wrong answers? Were you looking at the tattoo like I was? Were you thinking about that? Is it a dog? Am I remembering that correctly? Because if it's not a dog, I'm going to be really embarrassed. But I'm not going to cut this. I'm going to leave it here so you guys can see Professor Victor does not necessarily mean he knows everything. So that's that. Got it wrong. Hopefully you got it right. Hopefully you stick to the end of this video. Hopefully you were able to watch this video and it wasn't too upsetting or anything. I appreciate everybody who stuck around to the end. I really appreciate you guys for watching. The channel's been doing rather well, so thank you guys for that. Thank you guys for hanging out. And until next week when we do something completely different, I'm just going to say, class dismissed.